Good afternoon, St. Louis, and welcome into the Billikens Hub postgame. I'm your host for today, Matthew Rocchio. We'll be joined shortly by our special guest analyst, Bob Ramsey, the voice of the Billikens, to talk about a huge game. The Billikens defeat Davidson 83-75 in the second round of the A10 tournament, and they will now move on. In fact, we can just jump right into showing you guys what the bracket looks like for the Billikens. So obviously, St. Bonaventure versus Duquesne, other games going on. St. Bonaventure took down Duquesne earlier today, so we know who the Billikens are facing already in that next round. It's going to be a tricky one, or later on they could be facing them. They're going to be facing off against Loyola Chicago in the third round. My apologies there. Davidson falling to SLU today. St. Bonaventure and Duquesne earlier today. The other A10 games that are going to be playing, Fordham and George Washington, and then LaSalle and St. Joseph. Those are your other A10 games, but a huge win for the Billikens there. I mean, I don't know which performance jumps out to you guys the most, but for me, it's got to be Swope and Gibson. But at the same time, the freshman Amari McCautry. Talked to Zach Bovair in a piece I did for Sports Hub STL this week, and he had a lot to say about what's so special about Amari McCautry. And if you watch this Billikens game, it's hard not to agree with him. 14 points, 4 rebounds, a block, an assist, a steal, and oh yeah, he goes 5 for 5 from the field. And if you're in the buckets that Amari McCautry hits, 4 or 5 of them are pretty much identical, and it's bullying through 1 or 2 Davidson players on the wing. And then as soon as he gets into the post, he shifts into this finesse game, Euro steps around him or hits these floaters over the top of them and goes 5 for 5. And all of those were tricky. All of those showed a real deft ability to score that you just don't expect from a freshman who seems so raw. And at the same time, when you think about how the timing of those twos from Amari McCautry, every single one of them either came at the end of a run to kind of put the punctuation on it, or it was a 2 that the Billikens needed when they were absolutely drowning in those, tough parts of the game when they were getting run on by Davidson in the second half. I mean, the big numbers will be leading the game and leading the Billikens with 26, Isaiah Swope. And he was incredible. He restarts some runs of his own with some of that three-point shooting. Isaiah Swope was unbelievable in what could have been his very last college basketball game. And same thing with Gibson Jimerson, who pours in 25. And he's been absolutely incredible. Obviously, when you're in college basketball for 6 years, some expectations get thrown onto you. And he's stepped up to those expectations this year. He's increased every aspect of his game. He somehow has become an even deadlier shooter than he already was, and he was one of the deadliest shooters in college basketball. But today was a great example. Turning around and coming off those screens where if he got his shoulders square, if he got his feet set, and Davidson wasn't closing in on him hard, he was flushing it. It was good for 3, and the Billikens were changing the game. So just an unbelievably incredible performance from Gibson Jimerson today. Love seeing that. Aaron Sontag, this team is flawed, but this team is clutch. And yeah, I think that's a pretty good takeaway when you see what happened. Just let's focus in on the last couple of minutes of the first half. Billikens have, at one point late in the first half, a 13-point lead, and yet they're going into half with the game at a 5-point lead. And it's because they're turning the ball over. In fact, they had 3 straight possessions where they just dribbled the ball poorly. One of them was a good play by a defender where he got his hands on the ball and forced a jump ball after a steal. One of them was Isaiah Swope trying to split the defense, and he dribbled off a defender's leg. And the third one was, I believe, a travel call. So it's just, they were sloppy late in the first half, and that was problematic. And they almost let the game start slipping away. But the second half rolls around, they get that slow start, and Davidson's just hitting like crazy. They took over 23s in the second half. They had 10 threes made by about a midpoint of the second half, and that's not a prolific three-point shooting team under McKillop this season. And so to watch the Billikens continue to fight back when, again, they are so flawed, but undoubtedly, to Eric Sontag's point, this team is extremely clutch. And one of the reasons this team's clutch is because they have Isaiah Swope. And he was incredible. Those 2 threes he hit. We'll talk about the game of runs that this was with Bob Ramsey, our special guest analyst, when he joins us here coming up. In fact, he talked about all the different runs with Bill's assistant coach, Zach Bovair, in the postgame on KMOX. But the Billikens rip off that 11-0 run to take the lead, and Davidson cuts right back into it, and Swope, looks like things are starting to fall back away, and Swope hits 2 threes, and that really was the beginning of the end for that game for Davidson. One of the questions I put out on Twitter as we got this post-game show running was, for you, what was the moment? Because it really was. You can find a bunch of little moments in those final 4 minutes, but if you look at the game at the 6-minute mark, look at the game at the 4-minute mark, completely different basketball game. And so what happened in those 2 minutes, and what happened in maybe that fourth to third minute that really changed things? The Billikens defense again became the hallmark for this team. And that's been the case since the conference tournament and our conference schedule began. It's been surprising, but at every step of this season, the defense has reestablished itself as what this team's hallmark will be. And that'll always be surprising considering everything we heard about Josh Schertz coming into this season, but it stepped up when it needed to. The defense came to play, and the big players like Swope, Gibson, and Robbie hit some shots. And Robbie Avila didn't have the best game, but Robbie Avila was damn solid. We gotta give credit to Avila, because double-double, fills up the stat sheet, 13 points, 11 rebounds, 7 assists, 1 steal, 5 of 10 from the field, 1 of 5 from deep, and he was struggling on those deep shots, but the 1 3 he did make was an absolutely huge 3. And so Robbie Avila still, just like Isaiah Swope, always finds a way to have a big game in him at some point in this game, and today was no different for Robbie Avila. Getting some chats here, and Kevin Nixon. And again, you're listening to the Billikens Hub post game on Sports Hub STL on YouTube. Like and subscribe right here on YouTube. That way, when we do these post games, you'll get told. And go ahead and jump in the comments. We'll be putting up any comments that we get, and also presented here by Hot Shots, home of STL sports fans since 1990. Kevin Nixon says, first win in any tournament is big, one at a time. I believe that's the only way they let you do it, unfortunately, and they're going to have to do it 3 more times if they're going to be looking to punch their tickets to the NCAA tournament this year. Talked a little bit earlier about what the bracket's going to look like. Loyola Chicago is an interesting matchup. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. We'll keep breaking down what was an incredible game once Bob Ramsey joins us, but bringing up the winning one at a time and bringing up and looking at the bracket, you get Loyola Chicago up next, and considering how it went last time you faced off against them, and by the way, if you guys don't remember, that was an absolute slaughtering of the Ramblers at Chaifetz Arena. The other game that they played up in Chicago was a game the Billikens let slip away in the second half. Stop me if that sounds familiar after watching today. Eric Sontag has a KenPom projection because he's our stats man. KenPom projection tomorrow, SLU 72, Loyola 71. I'm a little surprised that KenPom, and usually with the way, based on the Mizzou and the SLU number today, the Vegas projections are usually right around a point and a half off the KenPom projections. So I guess we're going to be seeing SLU minus 2.5 tomorrow. SLU was minus 1.5 today. So I'll guess SLU minus 2.5 tomorrow. Maybe it's a minus 3. Eric Sontag's the betting expert. I'll let him dive in and guess some numbers there. Little surprised by that, but just because of the way that the Billikens played. But when you beat a team by 30, and it's one of the biggest three-point shooting, in fact, it is the biggest three-point shooting play in your program's history, and it's the biggest three-point shooting display by one player in your program's history, in Gibson Jimerson. You can point out that maybe the game against Loyola Chicago was a little bit outsized, but I mean that was a pretty interesting game. It was a pretty fun, and it'll be a pretty fun matchup. Glad the Billikens were able to get a win. Well, keep on coming in with the comments, because we have our special guest analyst Bob Ramsey, the voice of the Billikens over on KMOX. He's joining us live from DC, and we're going to bring him in today. Bob Ramsey, courtesy KTR at Ramsey. How you doing today, sir?
Well, battling to get through the game just like the Billikens, and it was really a good one. I don't know if any of our Hub listeners had a chance to hear the radio side. Zach Bovair came out as our post-game analyst and really broke a lot of things down. And one of the key things, and there were several that I know you've talked about, one of the keys is Isaiah Swope with 4 fouls, came back with 7 minutes left, and they trusted him to do what he needed to do. And obviously he went on his little run when he came back off the bench, and him being able to stay in the game, not only stay in the game, but perform at a high level was really, really key in this victory.
Yeah, I heard you talking to Coach Bovair about the way that Josh doesn't foul out his players. And a lot of the times this year, we've talked about that in the frame of him letting guys in the first half play with 2 fouls. But to your point also, bringing Isaiah Swope back in with that 4th foul and letting him do what he does. And I think there's still one part of that message that I think some fans don't understand, which is Isaiah Swope is, I would argue, maybe the second most important defensive player on the Billikens roster. And so with him having 4 fouls and with Davidson having a lot of guards and playing a very perimeter-based game where you got to be covering guys, you got to be closing out on guys and things like that, for him to come back out and play a strong defensive game as well as hitting his shots with those 4 fouls, that's, I mean, the definition of clutch for Isaiah Swope. Unbelievable game.
Yeah, you know, I think that's right. You make a really good point on what they try to do with that. And again, that goes to veterans who also really understand what's being asked of them. And Coach Bovair talked about during one of the timeouts where they had that little lull, and Davidson took the lead in the second half. And he talked about, in no uncertain terms, the 2 guys that were kind of the X factors, McCautry and Anya. He told them, you're not playing with enough energy. They came out, turned it around, and really roared back out. You know, you had that 13-0 run in the first half, you had an 11-0 run in the second half, and then you had the Swope run. And the game of runs, which we know basketball typically is, and the Bills had one more run in them than Davidson did.
Absolutely. And yeah, the balance of those other runs is that 11-0 run was sandwiched between 2 Billikens or 2 8-0 runs by Davidson. And so really, like you said, game of runs, I know it's cliche, but today it really felt like it because Davidson was taking and making some incredible shots throughout this entire game. And I love that you brought up that point that Bovair made about those 2 players. Let's talk about those 2 first. Kalu Anya, incredible defense in the first half. Anytime he's making shots, it's a huge thing for the Billikens offense. He was huge tonight, wasn't he, Rammer?
I'm sorry, say it one more time. I got the George Washington band in my ear. Go ahead.
Kalu Anya, just his defense in the first half and how crucial he was with any bucket he gets to the Billikens offense.
Yeah, you know, and I what I see with both of those guys, Anya, a veteran, and McCautry, a freshman, as they learn to understand the system more, it's amazing how their vision improves, right? And they see the floor, they see the opportunities, not only for themselves, one-on-one ball movement, you know, not only that, but more importantly, where their teammates are, where the passing lane.
We might have lost connection with Bob Ramsey there for a moment. We'll give it a moment here to see if he snaps back to us on the video live from DC. But you hear the band playing, you hear everything getting rowdy there in DC again. They're lining up for another game there. As again, Fordham and George Washington comes up here in about 35 minutes. And Rammer's back with us right there. Rammer, again, talking about Kalu Anya, he was amazing. And the other player there, Amari McCautry, that's the game I really want to talk about because Amari McCautry was incredible. 14 points, 4 rebounds, 5 for 5 from the field. And I talked about it earlier, just the quality of those shots. I think 4 of them had the same basic build, which is he bullies off the wing, and then once he gets into the paint, he goes to the skill factor. Just an incredible game from Amari McCautry.
Really was. 5 for 5 from the field. The team shoots, 56.9% from the field for the game, Rock. For the game. How do you do that? When the offense is running great, they're playing for each other. We talk about the hockey assists, but in this game there were hockey assists on hockey assists. Finding that open guy, continuing to cut. When the Bills have not played well offensively, a lot of times we'll see the ball stick. Somebody dribbling, and not the movement. And when it moves, it's absolutely a thing of beauty.
I think one of the best plays to show that was the pick and roll, Gibson hits Kalu hits Amari on the drive. Just those kind of plays, the ones where they were able to get Kalu in the seam and then he was able to make a short roll, that play kind of disappeared from the offense in the last month. And it was noticeable when it was gone. Tonight it was back and it was huge.
Yeah, 100% right. And being able to make the big plays when you needed to make them, again, because there was that stagnant point when a couple of them actually, when Davidson made their runs and things had kind of sort of settled. Earl Austin, my radio partner, talked about Kalu Anya pulling the Billikens out of quicksand with his play on both ends of the floor. And then McCautry, when they made their switches, no matter who he was on, he's going to be an all-league defender. There's no question about it. There's just no doubt. Kid's still growing. He's 18. He'll probably end up 6'7" or 6'8" with guard skills. The future is tremendously bright for McCautry.
It's hard not to get excited about Amari McCautry when you hear those kind of things from him. And again, Kalu had a great game defensively, but Amari McCautry defending Reed Bailey. I know Zach Bovair talked about that. Amari McCautry defending Reed Bailey. That was amazing. 17 possessions to get just 10 points for Bailey. The defense, again, was crucial for the Billikens. Looking forward to the Loyola Chicago matchup. Obviously, two very different games in Chicago and then in Chavetz Arena. Your thoughts, Rammer, we'll get you out on the matchup tomorrow for the Billikens.
Well, two things. That first game, I don't want to use the word should, because the team that should win wins, right? They did what they had to do to win. But the Billikens could have won that game, had a lead going in late, and then, quite frankly, blew it. Fouled a three-point shooter, and that they made all three, come down and make a three, you make a turnover, they get another bucket on a dunk, and then they rolled to the finish line. In St. Louis, the Bills pretty much dominated the game. And so two kind of different games. But I think tomorrow, the guy I'm most concerned about is Dawson. He has been so hot for them. He was their third option much of the season, but he has become the man for Loyola, and he will have to be addressed if the Billikens are going to win tomorrow.
Going to have to be another game where the defense comes to play. 1 p.m. tomorrow, you can hear the call on KMOX with Bob Ramsey and Earl Austin. It'll be the Billikens facing off against the Ramblers. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Billikens Hub postgame, Bob.
When we get off the radio tomorrow, I'll run back into the bowels somewhere here at Capital One so we can actually have a conversation, and we'll get it done tomorrow.
There you go. Thank you so much, Rammer. You have a great day. There he is, Bob Ramsey, special guest analyst here on the Billikens Hub postgame. Again, the Billikens, a huge 83-75 win in the second round of the A10 tournament. They move on. They will face off against Loyola Chicago, the Ramblers, tomorrow at 1 p.m. You can catch the radio broadcast with our friends Bob Ramsey and Earl Austin on KMOX starting at 1 p.m., or you can watch it on USA Network or whatever streaming service that gets you USA Network these days. I really don't know. It was an incredible game for the Billikens. If you have any comments here, join us on the YouTube chat here. Make sure you like and subscribe because we'll be doing these post-game shows after Billikens games, City games, Cardinals games, obviously, Blues games. We're doing one of those tonight, including our watch party. Make sure you check that out on SportsHubSTL.com. Eric Sontag always helping us out with the betting line. Still waiting on the line for tomorrow, but SLU -1 or a pick'em sounds about right. SLU 8 spots higher in KenPom, but Loyola gets the rest advantage. Tell you what, this looked like one of the spryest Billiken teams that I've seen in the last couple weeks. Obviously, having to play a second game in 24 hours, that's where everything kind of gets thrown into the churn now for the Billikens, because over the last month, look at the Ramblers game, look at the way they've shot the ball, look at the way the defense has changed over the last 2 months. This team can beat anybody in this conference, but can they beat the better teams in this conference when they already have a game on their legs in the last 24 hours, when they have 2 games on their legs in the last 48 hours? That's honestly the biggest question with the Billikens. They have a short bench, but at this point, they have a top 6 that can play with any other team in the A10. Amari McCautry is legitimate. He is a force off the bench. He's not a great shooter yet, but when he can dominate wings on the perimeter physically, a smaller wing on the perimeter physically, and then still shoot over bigs in the paint, or he can get past slower wings on the perimeter, and then he has the finesse to get around the bigs in the paint after he beats the guy on the perimeter. Just the game from Amari McCautry was so impressive, and it completely changes everything that the Billikens can do. And they can beat Loyola Chicago. They can roll on and they can beat St. Bonaventure if they beat VCU, or they can beat VCU. They already did that. I know that was at home, but still, they can win this tournament just in a vacuum of can they beat any team in this conference. That question's been answered. Watch what Isaiah Swope was able to do today. Watch Gibson Jimerson. Watch how much Robbie Avila is able to impact the game, even when he's not at his best. And they can take on any team in the A10 tournament. But my thought has been since last week as I was watching this team play their final home game at Chaffetz, I do not know how this team wins a third game in a sub 72 or a sub 80 hour period. Maybe 2. I'll give him 2. Loyola Chicago is not a bad matchup. Rammer's talking about how Dawson's really picked his game up. That's a fair point. But they showed that they can control the game away, which this Billikens team's doing is impressive. So on a neutral site, the Billikens team, I'm not worried about the matchup necessarily with Loyola. But VCU or even the Bonnies on a third day in a row, that's going to be tricky for the Billikens. An absolutely unbelievable game again, though, from Amari McCautry. 14 points, 5 or 5 from the field. I'm sure we'll get a highlight reel of his finishes. And if you're a Billikens fan, that should get you pretty excited about the future of this team. If you also want to get kind of excited about the future of this team, go check out sportshubstl.com, which is, by the way, where you need to go for tonight's Blues watch party. But if you're still focused in on the Billikens and you want to stay hyped for tomorrow's game as they roll into the third round of the A10 tournament, you can check out my piece when I sat down with Billikens assistant coach Zach Bovair. Talked about a lot of things we talked about today, why Josh Church is such a special coach, why development is so important to the Billikens process, and a lot of other great stuff. If you're a basketball nerd, if you're a Billikens nerd, you'll absolutely love the piece. So check that out on Sports Hub STL. And again, make sure you like and subscribe to this YouTube, because as long as the Billikens are rolling on, we will have Billikens Hub post games right after the games finish up. So if they win tomorrow at 1 o'clock, come around and right at about the same time, around 3:30, 3:20 or so, and we'll be having Billikens Hub post game again. And we'll be talking over, hopefully, another Billikens win as they keep rolling on in the A10 tournament. Again, this has been Billikens Hub postgame presented by Hot Shots, home of St. Louis sports fans since 1990. All the games, all the times. Check out Hot Shots. If you live in St. Louis, there's a Hot Shots close to you. Check them out. And even if you're not in St. Louis, you can keep checking us out here on Sports Hub STL. Again, tomorrow, Billikens 1 p.m. tip-off in the A10 tournament. You can catch us right here on Billikens Hub postgame afterwards. If you want to stay around and talk more basketball, we'll have a Mizzou Hub postgame coming up later today. Also, our Blues Hub postgame coming up after the Blues watch party. Again, Sports Hub STL there. Have a great day, St. Louis. Go Bills, and hopefully we're talking to you a couple more times here on the Billikens Hub postgame.